So I've joked before that this can get a little bit awkward, this section. So I should have some intro music.
That's right. Yeah.
So I've got some intro music. I'll obviously this won't be able to be on the copyright on the recording because this will breach copyright.
Nice. Yeah, that would get it taken down from YouTube.
Killian, hello.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. I've freaked out Zoom. It's asking me, are you playing music? It says. It's like, why don't you set up professional audio and audio settings?
Why don't you pay us some money?
Yeah. So we will. Nobody comes. Well, obviously, some people come on time, like Killian and Laura and P Jack, but most people come a couple of minutes late. Killian, you've been to a few of these. I always joke that we need some intro music. Is this working? Can you hear it?
Well,
No,
I
you
can't
can
hear
watch
it.
me eat my dinner if you want, but
Uh, can't hear
if
it. I need
if
to turn it
if I
up.
shut off my camera, it's because I'm finishing off the dinner.
nice. Yeah, it's like Zoom is magically filtering out your music to
Oh, really?
save your copyright.
Well, then there's no point because I can hardly hear myself because it's
Oh, yeah, no, it's
that's
it's amazingly
really you
managing
can't
to
hear
filter
it.
it out.
Wow.
That there's not a trace. So
Wow.
you'll just have to sing.
I'll have to set up professional audio next time. Stuart, there's an old face. Hello,
Best
Stuart.
of the old, please.
Yeah, yeah, old to me.
Hi
Stu
there.
came, Stu came on one of our running retreats
Oh, nice.
in Dartmore.
Yeah, I'm
And
a sports psychologist in running, so that's how I know Ad from there. But great to
Very
meet you,
cool.
Ad.
Yeah, you too.
Have you got many people coming, Ad?
I don't know because it's like a there's a it goes out to my patrons as well. So it, that's they don't have to tell me if they're coming or not. So.
Right, okay. Well, sure we'll get some great wisdom. I'll leave you to it. I'm just trying to get my TV set up to put you on a bigger screen for a friend coming
Uh-oh.
here.
Okay.
Let me get my makeup artist to come over here.
It's okay. We look forward to it.
Hmm. Jay is here. Hello, Jay.
Hello. I
Jay has
finally made
been
it to one of these.
Jay has been a guest on my podcast.
Very cool. Yes, I've
Oh,
seen her work many places.
yeah, alongside
Nice to meet you, Alex.
You too.
this is an all-star lineup. We'll just give it a couple more minutes. Uh, so we've got people coming. So Jay, you in California?
Salt Lake City, Utah.
Oh, you moved. You did say you did say
Yeah,
that. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Uh,
So dealing with a lot of trail runners here,
okay.
mountain stuff.
Yeah, great.
The amazing kinds of athletes who live in a place like this who like don't just run, they do like 12 things.
Right.
And a lot of them are like require avalanche training.
Okay. Just give it one more minute because I don't want to give the whole explanation of how this works and then have to do it all over again. You see why I need the music? This would be a good moment to be music to just gently be playing us in.
We could warm up with a few running jokes.
Oh yeah, have you got some?
What happens when you run in front of a car?
I don't know. What happens when you run in front of a car?
You get tired.
Oh, that is That is appalling. That could be in a Christmas cracker.
Yeah, it was actually I heard it at the start of a race. It was actually quite good. And then he had the follow up. What happens when you run behind a car?
You get exhausted.
Yes.
Yes. It's quite good to have a
I
follow-up.
thought they were good.
Yeah, the follow-up makes it a bit more, there's a bit more to it then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's all I got. I'm out
Yeah.
now.
Well, there's a famous joke where there's these guys on safari and their car breaks down in Africa and the lions start circling and one of them starts putting on his running shoes and the other guy goes to him, he says, "What are you doing? What are you doing putting?" He said, "I'm putting on, you know." He says, "You can't outrun a lion." And he says, "I don't have to outrun a lion. I just have to outrun you." I told
There
that
you
really
go.
badly, but okay, right, we're gonna start. Anyone else can be let in later. So the process is we can all ask questions of Alex. There is an option if you. Oh God, I should have found this before. I think it's React. Yeah, where if you click on React at the bottom of your screen, there's an option to raise your hand, and then that'll shift you up to the top of my screen. So then I'll know that you're waiting to ask a question. So that's a useful way. If you can't work it out, just wave at me, and we can take it from there. So we'll start. Yeah, no music intro, only a couple of terrible jokes, but I'm
Hey,
done. Mine was worse. Yeah, I'm delighted. I mean, I'll do an intro for the podcast, but for everyone here, I hope you know Alex Hutchinson's books. Uh, so I have an ongoing running all-time list of running books on my Patreon page, which I update if I read a book that's good enough to get in there. And Endure sits there at number one, even though it isn't strictly a running book, I'd say. But it's yeah, it's my one of my all-time favorite non-fiction books. Probably, yeah, well, definitely my favorite book, which I would class as a running book. So it's brilliant. It's about, for those who don't know, it's about the power of the mind and the role of the mind and how the mind affects it's endurance performance, your efforts in endurance sports of all sorts, not just running. And then Alex has recently, so here's Endure for anyone who hasn't. I've got a fade on, so and Alex has recently written a new book called The Explorer's Gene, which my blur is gonna not allow me to show you. Anyway, it's all backwards anyway. But it's called The Explorer's Gene. You can trust me on that. And it's his new book. It was out in March 2025. And I think the first question, because I'm sure a lot of people here have read Endure, but maybe not so many people have read The Explorer's Gene. So firstly, Alex, what is that book about? And also interested to know, because there was quite a bit of a gap from Endure. You probably had, you know, I know you write a column for Outside Magazine, used to be for Runner's World Magazine. You're constantly delving into the world of sports science. You have so many trails I'm sure you could follow in terms of trails of interest, in terms of subject area. So what led you to write about the explorer's gene? What's the book about? Yeah, that's an opening question for me.
yeah, it's a tough one. I should be better. They say you always need to have your elevator pitch ready about a book.
Yeah,
The Explorer's Gene has been a tough one to get the elevator pitch down, but basically it's about why we're attracted to doing new things or different things instead of sticking with what kind of got us there, which connects to your second question of like, why did I decide to write this book? In a sense, you know, one version of the story is that it was a bit of a not a I don't know, I don't want to call it a midlife crisis because that sounds depressing, but after Endure came out in 2018, and it did unexpectedly well. And it kind of set me up to be like, well, I can just keep writing the same thing for the rest of my career if I want. I can just, as you said, I write a regular column on the science of endurance, and I can be the science of endurance guy. And that's kind of what I'd been angling for, the previous 10 years as I was working on Endure and trying to establish myself as someone who knew stuff in this area. And Endure did well enough to make that possibility come true. And I found myself sort of in that position of be careful what you wish for,
yeah,
of like, oh, I can do nothing but this for the rest of my life. Oh, wait, that doesn't sound like heaven. It sounds like hell. I don't want to just like, I've written a lot about hydration, and I've written a lot about pacing, and I'm still interested in these topics, and there is still new stuff coming out on them, but it's marginal, right? Like
Right.
what has changed since Endure came out in 2018? Little bits of things. People are taking more carbohydrates these days. So I was kind of intrigued at my own reaction of like, why does the prospect of doing something new, which will probably do worse than if I had written Endure 2, here's some more stuff I thought about endurance. Why is that nonetheless attractive to me? And then that sort of related to me, I thought about that, and I thought about that in the context of my previous career path. I started out as a physicist, and then I became a journalist, and I've sort of moved around in different places. The way I like to travel, I'm sort of obsessive about trying to go off the beaten track. I'd rather go to like an okay view where there's nobody else than go to a spectacular view with, on a tour bus. And I just sort of thought there's a thread that lies through all this, and that thread runs through running too. Like, what is it that I get out of running? What draws me to keep trying new events and new distances and to keep training? And I thought I didn't know where that thread would lead. So this wasn't like Endure. When I started working on Endure, I knew what I wanted to say. When I started to work on Explorer's Gene, I just had a bunch of questions about, are we wired? Is it always good to explore? Is it actually a trap that I should learn to ignore this voice and just sort of take advantage of, of where I am, as opposed to always wanting to be somewhere else? So those are all the questions I ended up exploring. And so it was a bit of a meta thing of like, why do I want to write this book? I don't know. Let's write a book and find out why I want to write the book.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I love that. And so yeah, it is an expression of that explorer's gene in itself. The title, the explorer's gene, suggests it's something like that it's a gene that some people have, some of us have it, some of us don't. Is that the case? I mean, sounds like you've got it if that is the case, but are some people quite content not to explore, and is that fine?
Yeah, the title. So I'll confess, that was the title I submitted with my book proposal. And then once it was accepted and we got serious, I was like, okay, but we're not really going to call it that, right? Because this is going to cause all sorts of problems, all sorts of it's going to mislead people into thinking that
Right.
there's one gene. And they're like, no, it's a good title. We're going to call it that. And I'm like, uh-oh. So yeah, let me clarify. So there is some genetics. I write about it in the book. There's a gene that's related to a dopamine receptor that that gene variant arose about 50,000 years ago and is associated with when humans started to spread out all across the globe very rapidly. They went from being concentrated in a relatively small area to like Easter Island and Siberia and South America, in very short order. So that gene seems to be related to, and it is, I would say it's well established that it is related to who migrated and how they migrated. And that gene still exists today. In different prevalences in different places. The gene is associated with conditions like ADHD, which is not super surprising. Um, but the important but is this doesn't mean that some people are born to explore and some people aren't
Right.
born to explore. And in fact, we all have a DRD4 dopamine receptor gene. We're all wired in a very fundamental way and for good evolutionary reasons to have a curiosity about what's around the next corner. In some people that drive is turned up more than others. Partially, probably in part because of the DRD4 gene, perhaps, probably also other genes that we don't know about, and certainly also thanks to environmental factors, how you're brought up, what your context is, what your circumstances are. So there's a lot of different factors that influence who might be exploratory and in what different contexts. Because when we talk about exploring, it could be, trying new foods, reading interesting books, parasailing to the South Pole, so someone who doesn't want to hike to the South Pole, that doesn't mean they're not intensely curious and exploratory. It just might mean that the physical domain is not interesting to them. And so we don't want to or like I don't want to go skydiving because I don't want to die. I have low risk tolerance. That's different from exploring,
Right.
being either physically hardy. So anyway, so there's a lot of factors that go into it. There is a gene. The title, um, yeah, the title, let's think of it as a conversation starter.
Okay. And is it like, I mean, do you come to the conclusion that it's a good thing that we have this exploring this urge to explore, whether it's genetic or not? Or is it, I mean, I'm thinking in running, and I'm thinking, I was just thinking about the Kenyans, for example, who kind of live in this very simple way. They don't necessarily branch out. I remember trying to get Kenyans interested in ultra running. It was like, this is something new. I'm not interested. They just kind of practice this same repetitious. The day-to-day life is very similar. Is there like I'm presuming the conclusion is there's a place for people who want to explore and there's a place not to explore. But what's your feeling? Would we all be better off exploring? Would they perhaps be better off looking at other ways of training and other ways of eating and that kind of stuff?
So I would say for each of us, there's a place for exploring and there's a place for exploiting, or there's a time for exploring and there's a time for exploiting. We all need both of those ingredients
Right.
in our lives. And like I think running is a particularly useful laboratory for thinking about these sorts of questions. So for me, you start out running and you have goals and you have dreams, and it very quickly becomes apparent that if you as you achieve a goal, as maybe you've dreamed of running a certain time or qualifying for a race, as soon as you do that, it feels really good for a very brief time, and then that immediately gives birth to the next goal of like, well, if I did this, maybe I can do that.
Yeah.
And so, you can see very clearly that there's a kind of hedonic treadmill where, oh, well, if this is the way it works, I guess I'm doomed to never be satisfied. I'm never going to sit in front of the fireplace and just say, wow, what a great runner I was. I'm always going to be like, what can I do next? And you extend that to, as a metaphor for life. And it's like, well, boy, maybe maybe this drive to explore is, if you left unchecked, is it's going to drive me to greater heights. It's going to push me to explore, but it's also sort of definitely, or preventing me from ever enjoying anywhere I ever get to. So yeah, I guess I get to my conclusion is that there's not a simple like you should always do this or you should always do that, but that you should be. I think in general it is beneficial for us to respond to that urge to explore and to keep kind of turning over new leaves. I think it's satisfying. I think it's like not just for what we achieve, but for how we feel in that pursuit. But I think it's always good to interrogate that instinct and to ask, am I just blindly following this itch, or am I doing this thoughtfully and with good reason, or to not take it uncritically.
Yeah, that sounds like it could open a whole Pandora's box of like the way, marketing works and the way, religion works and what the Buddhists would say about this. But I'm gonna hand over to, well, you can answer that, but I know
I was just gonna say I've got young kids, so I think really it forces me to think about it as like what as I see them, internalizing the marketing messages and the consumer dissatisfaction, and so I think very carefully about what I wish I could implant in their brain, and of course what I wish I could implant in their brain and what I actually can implant in their brain are two very different things.
But presumably children are kind of need to be exploring more, do they? Than as you get older, you perhaps explore less. Is that true?
It is true, and it makes sense. It's actually there's a school of thought that one of the things that makes humans unique is their extended childhood, because it's a solution to what's called the explore-exploit dilemma. That you want to explore early in any time period, whether it's a lifespan or 2 hours at the casino or whatever. Early on, you want to explore as much as possible to find the best options or the best fits for you. And then as time goes on, you want to take advantage of what you've discovered, what you've figured out, and exploit that. So we listen to a lot of music when we're young. We tend to listen to less new music as we get older, because it's like, all right, we already know what we like. I know I don't like that kind of music, and I know I do. So I'm not going to keep listening to the stuff I don't like.
Hmm.
It's possible to go too far and then say, I only listen to the tunes that I liked when I was between the ages of 17 and 19.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate. But it does make sense to have a trajectory where you explore more as a kid. And you know, having kids is a great way of spurring yourself to explore. I explore more because I'm like, yeah, sure, let's go and see what's, you know, in the forest there and let's play with that stick or whatever.
Brilliant. Yeah. If anybody's got a question, it doesn't have to be about the explorer's gene. If you've got a question about endure, just put your hand up. Anybody want to ask a question? I have more questions if not. Aki, is it Aki?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I only read Endure really recently. I really enjoyed it, but you make me curious. I'll definitely check out your next book. But about Endure, what I really liked is the yeah one thread throughout the book is the journey of sub two of Eliud Kipchoge. But and in the afterwards, then yeah you refer to his attempt at well his successful attempt in Vienna, and you philosopher you go into the well possible reasons why it worked out well in Vienna, but I wonder it's fairly brief in the afterwards. So I wonder if you have any thoughts or if you reflected more on this, or maybe you've written more on this since the book or the afterword was written.
Yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing question and interest because I think my thought was that once someone, in other words, once Eliud Kipchoge ran sub two in Vienna, so then the question is, how does that influence other marathons run under regular circumstances? And I thought more people would follow. So, and it looked for a while like Kelvin Kiptum was gonna run sub two. I mean, he looked so good when he ran the world record in Chicago. And that to me would have, I think, supported the idea that that a lot of what was going on in breaking two was mental, was about belief and confidence and things like that. But Kiptum, you know, was killed in a car accident, unfortunately, and if anything, I don't know that the current crop of marathoners is any stronger than the crop was in 2016 or 2017. So then he sort of, well, what is it? Is it the shoes or is it the drafting? And the drafting is still very contested. So there's these lab studies that suggest that the difference between, you know, the arrowhead formation that Kipchoge had and possibly the car, they're like 3, 4, 5 minutes of advantage. But there's arguments against that it just doesn't make sense because you know when you see a rabbited race, for one thing, most of the runners still don't bother to properly draft behind their rabbits. They want to be able to see. They're out to the side. And then when the rabbits do drop out, they don't suddenly slow down by 2 minutes. I mean, sometimes they slow down when they blow up, but what you know when they've judged their pace right. So to me, it's like as time has gone on, I would say if you have three buckets, like the mental bucket, the drafting bucket, and the shoe bucket, the shoe bucket keeps getting bigger, you know, slightly bigger and bigger as time goes on. The drafting bucket, I'm not so sure about. The belief one, I think, is important too, but it's clearly not. It clearly wasn't just all, you know, all in our heads or all in Eliud Kipchoge's head. His self-belief is super important, but that's not all there was to it, right? So I don't know if that's answering your question. I guess those are the three factors that I'm thinking about, and I think in terms of Vienna versus where it was successful versus the Italian one where it was unsuccessful. I mean, he was pretty close. So that's a margin of maybe just the temperature and the familiarity with the task at hand. they used a different drafting formation. I don't know that that really made much difference. Also, the course might have been, it was slightly different. So yeah, the difference between 159.40 and two flat 25, that's within the margin of error, I think.
Yeah,
An
the next common
interesting,
day that day,
yeah.
maybe. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there's good days and bad
interesting.
days, right?
Yeah.
Like nobody runs the same time twice in a marathon for the most part. Some people occasionally, unless by luck.
I mean, Jacob Kiplebo is an interesting athlete running the Chicago Marathon this weekend. So he's got the world record in the half marathon, which is almost kind of comparable. It's so fast. I saw someone writing about it and said, no, that's not a typo, 56 minutes.
Yeah, I read that too. I think that was maybe in the lap count newsletter or something
Yeah,
like that.
exactly. But there was something about him drafting behind the car. He was running very close to the car that time when he ran that half marathon one.
Oh, interesting.
So there were lots of people sharing screen grabs of like, surely he's too close. He can't be running that close to the car. But anyways, we'll see what happens in Chicago because he's running his second marathon. So he was second in London in his first marathon. So I feel like there was that like you said, there was I think Kelvin Kipton's death almost was like such a shock that it almost kind of wiped out all that progress mentally as well, perhaps. Like it was like this was the guy we were all following and he's gone. And now it's like it was almost like men's marathon running took a step back. But I
It
feel like
did for a couple
yeah,
of years, eh? The times got slower, and I think even the times requested by for the rabbits
yeah.
got slower.
It was like yeah, it was interesting. Jay, you've got a question.
I actually have a whole list, so I'm going to try and behave well here
Yeah.
and just start,
We
start
can
with
maybe
one.
circle back in. Do like
Yeah,
one or
yeah,
two, and then
absolutely.
we'll see how it goes.
So uh, it seemed to me in reading the book, and first I need to do a little caveat that I audiobooked originally back in May or whenever, yeah, May, and I've been reviewing, but it's been a little helter-skelter. So, but in all of my encounters with it, it seemed to me like you've used the verb learn a lot, over and over, and I would love to know your thoughts on the amount of overlap between exploring and particularly in the way you've tackled it in this book and simply learning. Like, to what extent are they the same, and where is there not overlap?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And like there's a whole literature on learning and pedagogy, and it overlaps with the exploring literature. So, and I'll add since that's a hard question, I'll add another hard dimension, which is like, what's the difference between exploring and curiosity, and how are curiosity and learning linked? And so, and these are concepts that are not they're not well defined. Like that they because they have everyone has a sense of what they mean, but in the academic literature, it's like, is this the same? Is it overlapping? To me, explore. So learning is acquiring knowledge about the world. I think exploring is one way of learning, but there are other ways of learning. Like you can sit in a classroom and people can tell you things and you will then learn those things, which we wouldn't characterize as exploring. And I think one of the sort of dimensions where they differ is the difference between being passive and being active. So you can passively learn stuff, or you can actively go out and follow your own curiosity. Now, if your goal is to pass an exam at the end of the year, having someone teach you what's going to be precisely what's going to be on that exam is going to be the most effective way of doing well at that exam. But it's not necessarily going to be the most effective or satisfying or interesting way of learning about the world. And there's an interesting line of literature or line of science that tries to both in the sort of neuroscience world and in the pedagogy world of like, what is the difference between active and passive learning? And in the education world, there's this view that letting kids formulate their own questions, when they formulate their own questions, they learn much more than when they're told this is the question you have to learn to answer. And similarly, in the neuroscience world, there's a less robust, a smaller body of research that tries to look at. So there's a classic study from the 60s, which is a little bit gruesome, and I can't even remember the exact details, but basically it's like they took two cats and attached them both to opposite sides of like a Ferris wheel or something, and one of them got to control how they moved, and the other one just had to follow along, and so they both saw exactly the same things, but the cat that was making the choices of what to pay attention to in the world learned more. And they've done the same thing with humans in MRIs, where you have one human that gets to move his eyes and look around and see this world, and the other human just gets to see the same thing that the first human is seeing. And they learn in completely different ways. And so I'm not explaining those studies very well, but the simple analogy is if you get in a car and one person's in the driver's seat and one person's in the passenger seat, you drive through an unfamiliar city, you get to some destination, and then you say, okay, how do we get back home from here? The person who is driving will have a much, much better chance of being able to tell you where you've come from than the person who's in the passenger seat. And that's the difference between being active and being passive, or in another way of putting it, to paying attention to the world because you are navigating through it versus just being a passenger. So to circle back to what your actual question was, Jae, I think learning can have both those dimensions, but exploring really, by definition, involves this idea of following your own interests and deciding for yourself what's worth learning, or what's worth discovering, or what's worth trying. I don't know. Does that kind of answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, it does. And so, and I was having thoughts along those lines, and like my training is fundamentally in a pedagogical method. So like learning even more than movement is, well, okay, you can't separate them, but is fundamental. Anyway, so I'm always thinking about learning, and I'm trained not to teach. I'm trained to create learning experiences. Just create the conditions where a person is very likely to discover the thing that they needed to know, and
because
then
you can tell them 50 times in a row, but
sorry,
because you could tell them over and over again, but having them experience and stumble upon the right thing themselves is a different experience for them.
Right. And that goes like, that's 1,000 times more true when you're talking about motor learning then. It's like really, you just can't, the fact is you really can't explain. But like words just don't touch the part of the brain that is regulating your movement. But as I think I'm also a parent, so I've had this built-in laboratory for 16 years where I'm also testing out these, and I see my son go through school, right? And really, and yeah, that distinction between passive learning and active learning, like, seems to map, I think, very well onto like learning without exploration versus learning through exploration. And yet, what of value does anyone get out of passive learning? Like, does it even deserve the name learning? Because like you'll pass a test, but do you know it later? If you don't use it, if you don't explore with it. Like even when I was training to become a Feldenkrais practitioner, like I was given good learning experiences, but I still went out and intentionally broke all of the rules that I was taught in order to discover whether they were really true, and so now they're mine, right? Any good teacher that my son has ever had has has helped kids learn through exploration and discovery, has helped, anyway. And my son went to Waldorf school, so it's like we don't fill the cup, we light the fire, or whatever it is, that there's no teaching, but there's learning again, and it's like, and what you get. And I even think that why kids chafe so much at school is because it's stultifying to be trying to learn passively. So anyway, I almost want to take your book as as an argument for active learning, and for it actually, I think this actually is learning, and anything else really probably doesn't deserve the name.
That's
Plant that
so
flag.
yeah, and obviously I feel pretty passionately about it too. Like I really worry about the what seems to me to be an increase in passivity in the way we relate to the world through screens and stuff. Then again, so my younger daughter is 9, and I don't want to like call her out online here, but it's like, and I want her to explore and discover numbers and stuff. But then I realized like she doesn't know what 2 times 3 is. And it's like, oh, wait, yeah, we've been kind of gently trying to lead her to discover the joy of figuring out what 2 times 3 is. It's like, okay, we've waited long enough. Now here's a sheet of times tables. We need you to just master the times tables up to 6 or whatever. So, I mean, it doesn't really matter what the words are, whether we call it learning or not. There are types of passive learning that can, in some circumstances, create the groundwork for other things. And with a sufficiently creative and caring learning environment, maybe we wouldn't need to rely on those forms of passive learning. But for whatever we did, we didn't manage to get the times tables inculcated correctly. So yeah, so I don't think we're ever going to eradicate that sort of rote learning, but I think to the extent that we use it, it's the creating the foundation for the more interesting types of learning. Because ultimately, if you leave school and all you've done is learn in a rote fashion, then you're not going to have any interest in continuing to learn, and that's going to be a sad way of spending the rest of your life.
Yeah, there's a real almost contradiction in terms of the way the education systems are set up and what we really want to, and then there's all sorts of, it's another Pandora's box we could open here. What is the motivation behind that? Is that intentional? Is that not intentional? But it's a really good connection to make with the explorer's gene and education. Anyway, I think that's really interesting. I'm
glad you picked up on that, Jay, because it's sort of buried. The active versus passive chapter is buried near the end of the book, and it's a dense book. It's something that maybe one of the things I feel most strongly about in the book.
Oh yeah, I thought that was so valuable, actually, and like especially when you have a kid and social media and gaming and stuff. So good.
Yeah. Gene, you have a question?
Yeah, hi Alex. Just wondering if you had to write Endure again, is there anything you'd take out in light of any new evidence, and is there anything you'd include that you didn't include the first time around?
That's interesting. Let me think about this carefully.
I actually had the same question written down, so it's a good question. But I did look it up. It was 2018 it came out, so
yeah,
in a bit of time, things changed.
So probably the weakest science in there. Maybe this is I don't want to. The chapter that I maybe have that I've had the most second thoughts about is about electric brain stimulation, and that was a fun chapter to write because it's just such a ludicrous idea that you could hook up a 9-volt battery to stick it on your head and get faster. And yet the science seemed actually pretty good. It's one of those cases, and I shouldn't be surprised because these cases are not uncommon, where it's like, yeah, there's a bunch of small studies that seem promising, but it just hasn't, like, that fad, as far as I can tell, has faded from professional sport. There were pro cycling teams doing it. I don't think they're doing it anymore. And you do those big meta-analyses there've been dozens of studies on this idea that electric brain stimulation can enhance your performance. They tend to be small studies. And when you meta-analyze them, when you put them all together, there's some telltale signatures in that data of publication bias, where it's like, whenever there's random error, it always seems to point in the direction of favorable effects rather than unfavorable effects, which is a sign that there's probably other studies that people did that didn't pan out, that didn't get published. So, I mean, I think I haven't read the book in a little while, but I hope that I was relatively cautious in how I framed electric brain stimulation. I think I was, that it was still an open question. if you were to pin me down and say, what what's the most likely, what is the ground truth about electric brain stimulation? I would say, I suspect there is a real effect that can be elicited under very careful, controlled conditions. Uh, Probably not such that it's easy to use in a competitive context or anything like that. Certainly not by the headphones that Halo Neuroscience was selling. And that, to me, that is what's interesting, is that if that is in fact true, that there is an effect there, that it tells us something about the nature of endurance, even if it doesn't tell us what the next big fad in performance enhancement is. But anyway, the fact that I had a whole chapter on, I think it was called Zapping the Brain, is probably out of proportion with the strength of the research. So I would maybe cover that, but not give it a whole chapter. My defense for that is that, the first two parts of the book, the first two were really about trying to understand the nature of limits. And then the third section is like, I felt I could anticipate the people saying, okay, but tell us how to use this. So I was trying to have that final section of the book be like, here's some ideas for how we can actually put this into practice. And so I was kind of forcing it a little bit, because I'm not, that's not me. Like, I'm not a coach. I don't really know, there aren't that many magic things. So I kind of maybe stretched out the brain stimulation farther than it deserved. And conversely, to the other half of your question, Gene, what did I not give enough attention to would probably be sports psychology. Now, and I discussed it a little bit, but the challenge with sports psychology, I have a bias, maybe coming from my physics background. It's like, I want to see stuff I can measure. I want to see stuff that's repeatable and, where we can do placebo-controlled, double-blind crossover studies. And sports psychology, it doesn't exist in that world. You can't blind someone to what you're telling them, and then you can't do a crossover study by telling them to forget everything you just taught them about the importance of self-talk or whatever. So the nature of the studies that I like to see, it's very hard to do them in a sports psychology context. But, and I kind of got into, I think the last chapter is called Belief. And to me, that's, I think, probably my favorite and the most interesting chapter in the book. But it kind of skirts around the idea of sports psychology. And I think maybe a more complete version of that book would have really gone deeper into the ideas in sports psychology that can turn the dials that we've been talking about in the previous sections of the book, not just effort, but self-belief and, confidence, and what does visualization do? And all these things are harder to answer in the hard science way that I like. Although I would say in the 7 years since the book has come out, there have been further studies that I think would allow that section to be stronger. So I guess, yeah, to answer your question in a shorter way, a little less about gadgetry like brain stimulation and a little more about sports psychology, which is harder to get the science of, but has a pretty good empirical base and, of people actually doing it, and also a pretty good theoretical base of, yeah, this makes sense with everything we've been discussing throughout the book.
And that sounds like, is your kind of thought process around sports psychology changed? Does it play a bigger role in performance than you perhaps thought at the time when you were starting to write?
Yeah, I mean, I was already, in the midst of a
You talk about that in the
let's
book.
say.
Yeah.
That I was super skeptical in the 90s and early 2000s. And then I'm like, okay, maybe this matters. But I had an interesting experience I did a talk somewhere, a few months after the book came out. I think it was in Texas or something. And there was a question from the audience saying, like, you get to the end of the book and the last line is something along the lines of, what Eliud Kipchoge has shown us is that, there's more in there if you can come to believe it, or something like that. And what I was trying to, And the question was like, it sounds like you don't really believe it. After that whole book, do you still not even believe what you've written? And I was like, oh, well, that's not what I meant to say. What I was trying to say ostensibly was that belief matters. So there's more in, you can dig deeper, but only if you believe you can dig deeper. But it was one of those situations where I think the woman asking the question had kind of understood the subtext of what I was saying better than I had myself when I was writing it, that she had picked up that I still had doubt. And so people would, another question, since I wrote about like mindfulness training and stuff, people would say, so what's your experience been with mindfulness training? And my answer was, and so it was like, I've never really tried it. I mean, I thought the research was fascinating. And so I wrote about the research in the same way that I've never tried, like, of the 100 supplements I've written about, I've tried 0 of them. I also haven't tried, mindfulness-based stress reduction or whatever. Not that I don't believe it works, but that's probably, it's just, but there's still some skepticism within me, which is less now than it was in 2018. But it's still not 0, and this is not like a rational skepticism necessarily, but just like a discomfort with unmeasurable things of
Right.
what fits with my personality.
Okay. Because sometimes you think, so, Eliud Kipchoge says any human can do anything. And you're like, well, I can't fly, right? And I
Yeah,
can't run
exactly.
I can't run a 2-hour marathon. But there's degrees of this, aren't there? And I don't think he's saying that. And yeah.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that, and certainly when I started reporting on breaking too, and the first time I interviewed Eliud Kipchoge, and I just thought, you're talking nonsense, and then
But
after
weirdly,
a
he
while,
isn't, right? Weirdly, he isn't. There is that power. That belief has a power, even though it sounds to you, and I understand that it can kind of sound almost ridiculous. There is
yeah,
something in it,
and
and
I
I
think
guess unearthing that is the trick.
and it's not that he believes he can fly just by
Yeah,
believing it. He's speaking metaphorically to
yeah,
an extent, and I came to appreciate that he was uh, he what he was saying. Yeah, I don't know what I'm trying like that. Even if his belief was greater than what could be demonstrated empirically,
yeah,
having that belief was valuable.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so it's like there's a point at which that skepticism becomes self-defeating. And I say this as an avowed skeptic. That the
yeah,
same with supplements. Like I believe 99% of supplements are absolute crap. But it's like, but if you just ignore me and believe in the supplement, you're probably going to get a benefit from it.
yeah. Jay's made a good point in the chat that the self-transcendence 3100 is going on right now, and actually this speaks to my own personal experience, having attempted to qualify for this race by doing a 6-day race where I had to run 100 kilometers a day for 6 days, which is what these guys are doing. It became such a mental thing. I just didn't want to do it anymore. I had no belief that that was going to get me, it was going to benefit me in any way whatsoever. And yet these guys are doing it for day after day after day. And I remember watching the videos of these guys running around the block, and they don't look like super athletes. They don't look like, like the Kenyans running by. They just look like regular people, but they must have some incredible, and I think a lot of it comes from the fact that they're invested in the Sri Chinmoy meditation and the group that they have this that gives them this incredible connection to the race that is transcends. I mean, you're a science guy, so you're saying, well, let's test this, and but I'm
No, but
looking
you're
at anecdotes and I'm thinking there's like as Jay says, there's a really good example of belief in action.
and there's a sort of cottage industry in sports physiology of like, let's do studies to find out what parameters predict performance in races.
Yeah,
And so, you know, what if you're talking about a 10K or a half marathon versus a marathon, and it's like, well, it's, and the classics are lactate threshold and running economy and VO2 max. And you can see how these different ingredients mix together and how that mix changes as you go to longer distances. But as you go beyond the marathon, what you find is the importance of all three of those predictors gets less and less and less. And so by the time, and there's been some studies where it's like, it's a ultra race where there's a bunch of different distances. And so you can say, what's the best predictors for the 25 mile, the 50 mile, the 100 mile, the 200 mile? And by the time you get to these what seem to me to be very, very long races, although they're very short compared to the Sri Chinmoy races. It's like, oh, there's like no predictors, like nothing we can measure can predict who's going to do well in this 200-mile race. Well, that doesn't mean that there's no different, that it's just random and you roll the dice to see who does well. There are things that we have trouble measuring, and or that physiologists have trouble measuring. And you could say, well, will psychologists figure out how to measure them? And it's like, well, maybe they will, maybe they won't, but they're real, regardless of whether we can figure out how to measure them. It's just hard to then pinpoint and then to figure out what are the things we can learn from that experience or from these groups of people.
Yeah. There's a few recommendations of books in the chat if anybody wants to look at that. Is it Laura? It says Ronnie on screen, but is it Laura? Have you got a question?
No, it is Ronnie.
Oh, it's
I
Ronnie.
think
Laura's down below. Oh, yes.
There is a Laura.
Sorry. You crossed over. You switched places on my screen, and
yeah, I just saw myself move when I put my hand up.
Okay. Over to you. Let's change direction here. Or maybe not.
I've got a question, but I was also going to say about going back to the idea of like there's no room for doubt. There's only room for belief when you get to a certain point. It reminded me in another field of, I was listening to the writer Lee Child, the very well-known writer, talking about his process, and it kind of reminded me of that. So he wrote, I think it was like 30 or more books, and every book he would just start, I think it was the 1st of September, he would write 4 or 5 pages a day, and in between 80 and 90 days he would have a book. He would slightly revise it and then submit it. And there's just no doubt in his mind that he could do it. He just did it. And when it became difficult to do, he stopped, because he didn't want to interfere with that self. He said when he lost the belief in what he was doing, he couldn't do it anymore. So he handed it over to his brother, and they started doing it together. And now his brother writes the books. But so it's almost like he passed that belief on to someone else now. But I was just struck by the fact that, people who've written books or who write know how much you have to push through those barriers sometimes, and how you have that doubt. But he just he had this process, it worked, he put the effort in, but there was no room for self-doubt.
It's interesting. Like when I first became a journalist, and this was 20 years ago, and I was a freelancer, so and I still am, but I was a freelancer with no regular gigs, so I was just writing a billion articles for like 10 cents each. And my aunt, who was an academic, she'd been wanting to write a book for a long, long time, and just couldn't sit down and get it done. And I remember after a few years, she was like, how do you write so much? How do you get this writing done? And my answer was like, rent. Like, I have to pay my rent. If I had a job as an academic or something where the writing was on the side, and lots of academics write books. They have a full-time job, they have a salary, and they're writing the book from the pure love of knowledge. But for me, it's like, this is slightly different from belief, but it's like there's a reason. It's not belief, but it's the elimination of doubt. It's like, there's no like internal struggle of like, will I or will I not sit down and write this 2,000 words? Like, you write this 2,000 words because you have to pay rent, and so that not that I'm now sitting at the top of the pile or anything, but it's less urgent now. And so it's actually, it's quite a bit harder to sit down and to believe that I have something interesting to say, because I can actually think about, do I have something interesting to say? Whereas before it's like, doesn't matter. You just have to say something. And if you can't think of anything to say, add a lot of adjectives, because you have to have this many words by this time and you need to submit it. So, there are different ways of getting to the absence of doubt, but you have to find some path.
It's really interesting. I mean, I thought it was interesting that, he did get sacked from his job before that. So there was a necessity, but there was also a self-analysis of like, I can do this. He works in TV. These are the skills I have. These I'm going to use. I mean, it struck me as a particularly kind of masculine way of looking at the problem. As well, and he is that kind of writer. But I thought it was pretty interesting. Can I ask another question which is not related to that?
Yep.
I haven't read your new book, but I'm really looking forward to reading it. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about kind of like the commercialization of exploration, or like the professionalization of kind of exploring and adventuring, and kind of what's the relationship between that and the kind of our sort of biological instinct towards exploration. And obviously there's lots of impacts of that, like environmentally, socially. There's a danger that we all buy into this idea that we all have a right to do certain types of exploration at the expense of other people or places. So yeah, I guess it's kind of that sort of commodification of the idea.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack in there. A couple of quick thoughts. One thing I do get into in the book is just briefly is, you know, these days all exploring, quote unquote, is done to raise awareness of some cause or whatever, to raise money for something. And one point I make is, let's be serious. It's not that people are sitting there saying, "Oh, look at this injustice in the world that I found. How could I possibly raise awareness about this injustice? I know I will be the first person to unicycle, through Asia." It's people are drawn to do that. They have things they want to do, and then they're asking themselves, and then they come up with the post hoc rationalization of showing that it's useful in some way. So, so there's that dimension of it that I think still speaks to the fact that people are following their drive to explore. But there's also a distinction between being the first to do something, exploring as being the first to do something, and exploring as doing something that's new to you. And I think, and this part of what drives, I think, the commodification of exploration, or the desire to say to go to Mount Everest and to pay someone to haul you up to the top. You're still not the first to go to the top of Mount Everest, but I think it's an echo of that desire to be doing something that nobody else has done and nobody else can do. And I think in the world today, that's kind of both a futile impulse and maybe a counter, maybe a destructive impulse too, that we have to go farther to create the illusion that we're the first to do something. And so what I end up arguing for in the book is that it's possible to explore, that personal exploration is maybe the greater good, that of doing things that feel new to you and that allow you to discover new things about yourself or about the world. And that can be done, the way I end the last scene of the book is me down by the river a block from my house with my kids, exploring in that way, rather than feeling I need to go to Papua New Guinea or something like again. It's complicated. It's I guess the last point I'll make on this is just there's kind of, when I ask why do we explore, there's kind of two ways I end up thinking about it. One is because exploring leads us to good things. It leads us to discover new lands and new ways of new sources of food or whatever. The other is because exploring feels good. It feels meaningful. It feels like we're discovering things. Those two things are linked evolutionarily. There's the reason exploring feels good is because it drives us to discover new and better ways of doing things. But in 2025, and look, there are reasons to explore, like, so that, exploring in a career sense helped me get to a career that pays the bills. So there's good utilitarian reasons to explore. But in terms of following the urge to explore, I think it's that second bucket of exploring feels meaningful. It feels empowering. And that kind of exploring doesn't require going to the top of Mount Everest. And so I'm kind of making a case for that kind of exploring.
That sounds sounds like a good thing to do. Yeah. Jay, you have your hand up again. Let's go over there.
Yeah, if we feel it could be legitimately my turn again, but I don't want to.
You're the only one with a hand up. So
Okay. I love the end of the book, by the way. And that's the stripe of explorer I am. I'm never going to be trying to summit Everest, so I appreciated it very much. And just the world you can discover personally. and in nature. But so on that note, um, and here's where like I hope I didn't miss something in my not very consistent, shall we say, exploratory approach to your book. But I kept expecting you to bring up sensory motor maps. And you talked about talk about outer exploration, like exploring the world. And then you talk about the world of ideas, Oxford illness or whatever, in that section. And then you talk about taking on the challenge of exploration as a way of exploring self. And but somewhere in there, like for me, like the kind of exploration that then is my professional bread and butter is like literally the exploration of self, the creation of the map of the body in the brain. And I know less brain science about that than I probably should, because it's a clinical side that is where I live. But what I was taught in my Feldenkrais training, that you like an infant is simultaneously discovering the outer and the inner. You're exploring your environment and discover about yourself. You try to reach for the toy and you learn about toy and arm, right? And you can't separate those things. And so I guess I just wanted to, like, somewhere in there's a question, but I wanted to ask, did you look at that, or your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so first of all, say I don't know a ton about that, and that's a really cool lens through which to look at exploration. I think the part that came closest and that I actually ended up dialing back quite a bit from the book because it was already too long was I was looking at this comparing to robot learning, and so there's the section where I talk about the robot dogs, and that kind of research and the realization that exactly as you're saying, to learn about the world requires a body that you can't teach a robot about gravity or about what's in its environment. And this idea of embodied cognition, that what we learn depends on the body that we learn it in. And so that to create true artificial intelligence, you have to put it in a body so that it's stumbling and it's learning about its arm as it reaches towards the toy. And there's some really fascinating experiments done with basically developmental robots, saying, how do you make a robot as smart as a human? Well, we only know one way of making things that are intelligent as a human, and that's being a human infant and growing up. So they start with actually they used robot dogs for these initial experiments and say, we're not going to teach them anything about the world. We're not going to tell them how to move. They don't even know what their commands do. All we're going to tell them is do a bunch of random things, and whatever action teaches you the most, essentially reduces your whatever you find most surprising, do more of that. And so that it takes them thousands and thousands of hours of training to learn that, oh, this circuit makes me move my leg, and this circuit makes me move my head. And over time, then they learn to walk sideways and then forwards and then reach and touch. And then they're put in a playground environment. So when they touch something, it swings or it moves, and they learn about that. And they learn about this stuff with no instructions other than do what's most surprising. So that's a kind of connection between exploring as a prime directive, do what's most surprising, and learning about your body. Now, I don't know the neuroscience well enough in terms of sensory motor maps and stuff. So that's actually a cool area that I should learn more about. But I think that's kind of maybe getting at some of the similar ideas that you're thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, I use all the time. I use the metaphor of exploring a new land for what people do, because I'm working with adult humans who haven't engaged in that kind of, especially motor exploration, for decades, usually, and are not that tolerant of their own errors.
Yeah.
and are very uncomfortable with not knowing and not being told. And to me, this just points to the whole swath of cultural failures, right? And educational failures that we're all subjected to. But so the way I reassure people is that, like you come to a new land, you don't know what's there. And so the first thing you experience is not knowing. And then you go in a direction and you see what you see. And then you know a little bit. And and like that's going to be your experience for a long time. And if it's not, I'm not doing my job because you're not learning anything new. But people really need that reassurance because, well, especially when people come for me, not for random personal development. They go to potentially other Feldenkrais practitioners for that. They come to me because like they can't run for some reason. They have a problem they're trying to solve. And they would accept almost anything from me, except for a learning experience in which they feel completely clueless. Like that's the hardest thing, right? And so, which makes me wish maybe I don't.
It's a really interesting,
right? And it's all getting worse, and and the younger people are having more trouble with that than they used to, and so then that points to technology and stuff. But
yeah, I mean, these are powerful. Like, as someone who took up in a very unserious way rock climbing as an adult, it was just such a shock to me to realize that I hadn't felt that incompetent at anything in 20 years, and that that the feeling of moving my body in totally different ways and not knowing how to do it, and looking around and seeing 8-year-olds who knew how to do it, knew how to do it. And it's like, this is so weird. And that really was, and that was 10 years ago or whatever. So that was part of the eye-opening moment. It's like, wow, have I stopped discovering new things? Have I stopped learning how to move in different ways or think in different ways or try different things? It was like a visceral experience of like, this is really uncomfortable not knowing, the basics of how to move my body in this way.
Did you find it invigorating though? Like,
yeah, it was fun. Well, there was the duality of feeling very uncomfortable and incompetent, but also like, this is so cool to be learning something new. Look, I can do this now. I never realized I could do that, or a month ago I couldn't do this, and now I can.
We do these we have these running retreats and we do these movement workshops, which the guy who does them calls finding form. And I know I've interviewed on my podcast a guy called Paul Tierney who works with a similar process where you just try things and you feel things and you try and work out what works for you. And people come on the course and they just want to be told, how do I do it? And you're like, no, you just try this, try that, run, see what it feels like, practice different things, think about it. And people are like, just tell me why. And we have that, we come up against that. I think it goes back to your first question, Jay, about how we learn. We get so used to being told that the teacher's going to tell you how to do something and you're going to do it, that it becomes almost resistant to not getting that. It's almost like, this isn't what I signed up for. I signed up for the answers and you tell me the answers and I have to do the work myself.
I would find that very hard. Yeah, there's no doubt. Like, it's like,
I have to
you tell me where to hold my arms. Come on.
Yeah, exactly.
But the problem with that is that most people's problems with especially an action like running, which is it's a fundamental gait for our species. We're not talking about how to do backflips here, is not what they don't know about running, but what they don't know about themselves. Right? Because the physical forces involved in running are a stimulus that is powerfully organizing if you have the range of options and the ability to interpret and respond to them. And that's what's missing for most people. The rest you can explain, but it's just
yeah. Brilliant. Well, I think we've kind of gone over our hour with Alex. So we've worked, Jay, you've worked him very hard tonight. You've given him some tough questions.
Thank you so much. This has been fabulous. Thank you. And thanks.
I feel like I've learned actively and explored.
Yeah, I think we all have. I've been, my thought processes have been going in every direction. I feel like I need to get you, like I said, I need to get you back on, Alex, and explore some of those some more. But did anyone else have a very quick question? One last very quick question. Otherwise, we'll say thank you to Alex. Okay, well, Alex, it's been really interesting. I knew it would be, and so thank you very much. As anyone listening will know, the Explorer's Gene, or will sense from this conversation, the Explorer's Gene is a fascinating book and a worthy follow-up to Endure. So if you haven't read it, go and read it. And yeah, until next time, thank you, everybody. That's it. Any parting words, Alex? Any parting
Just
advice?
thanks so much for coming and having this conversation. It's really rewarding and fun to hear what people think and to just share some of these ideas.
Yeah.
So thanks to everyone.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you, everyone. Bye.
Cheers.